Hi, everyone. I'm Professor Lisa Short, and from the accent you can hear, I am Australian. I have a multitude of roles, so I prefer not to actually sort of box myself into, a particular role, rather than what I specialise in, which is certainly digital behavioural analytics and digital transformation. And I tend to use frontier and emergent technologies. I am known, obviously, for my specialties in blockchain, AI, Internet of Things and so forth, and also using education and tools to ensure that we make businesses more resilient globally. I guess my career would be what many used to call a generalist, because if you look at my CV, it's quite eclectic. When I first left school and I studied accounting and financial management, but I didn't just do that. I also had a degree in geography as well. So I had, even back then, quite an eclectic career. But I've been a lifelong learner. And so those skills that I learnt back then in terms of, economics, geopolitics, understanding the way the world was put together with geography and so forth has always sort of fascinated me. But I've also always been interested in technologies and improvement and ongoing learning and empowering gender, for example. So I started my career in a regional country town of Australia where when you left school, it was expected that you would get married, have children and not work again. And I certainly didn't fit that profile, and very proudly so. So I worked. I did have my children young. And then went back into business, and I ended up back in the vocational education space, in the learning space, where I, for the first time, was looking at skill sets and capacities and how to build workforces to support businesses. And so I guess in many ways that's sort of where my business career began. And what I learned very early on was that there was sort of common threads in that process, and that common thread was technology, and that we were all very much connected, and the way businesses worked was connected with other things that impacted those businesses. So that's sort of how my career in ecosystems began. And then just by chance, I started working with some of the very high-risk industries. At the time, my ex-husband was an ambulance officer, and so I started working in the pre-hospital care space and the health space, and working with civil construction, oil, gas, mining, doing risk management. And I guess in many ways that was my initiation into what we would now call cyberspace. I don't particularly like the term cyber. I prefer to talk about the digital space that we work in, digital trust, and building resilient businesses in that space. But that's sort of where it really came and where it really commenced, was when I started working in the high-risk industries. And I was working with oil, gas, mining, civil construction, the really high-level risk management and risk strategy processes, and writing management systems for organisations like Rio Tinto and Xstrata and so forth. But I was also studying and working in the health space. So I studied medicine and so forth. The commonality between the two was risk and strategy. And that's sort of, I guess, how I got involved in working in this sector. Years ago, being a generalist was considered in some ways a weakness, because people made the assumption, and it was an erroneous assumption, that you couldn't be good at everything that you did. That's actually incorrect. Being a lifelong learner means that you build a profile of amazing skills and experiences, and every now and then you can just drop in that skill that you've got, and you go, wow, I didn't realise that would come back to be useful, and it does. So I think we've realised that being multidisciplinarian and having an understanding of how we all fit together, particularly obviously in the last year, we are a very connected world, and we've learned that we need to have a lot more skills than what we may have thought we needed before. So it's certainly a strength, not a weakness. I'm world renowned for designing ecosystems of frontier technologies and emergent systems to manage, global challenges and global problems. And you need to have that bird's eye view to be able to look down and see what are the objects that you're playing with, what's in that ecosystem that need to be connected, what are the connecting pieces, how do the puzzles, pieces of the puzzle fit together. And when you're building technology, it's not siloed. So you need to be able to go, well, that object needs to connect to that object at some point. So there's infrastructure that sits there. It's a bit like building a house. You've got to have a strong foundation, and then you can build the house around that. And so the ability when you're building emergent technologies is it's profoundly important to be able to have that bird's eye view and know how those pieces fit together and the connectedness of them. So that's, it's very, very important. And, one of the businesses that I have now, the Hephaestus Collective, is about that. We've recognised from a multidisciplinary approach, and I work with 4 of the, world authorities in this space, is to say, for the first time, we need to stop thinking in silos. We need to be working together in this digital technology space. I've got to say that generally when people ask me to write my bio, I almost recoil in fear because I go, I have no idea how I write what I do. I call myself a digital analyst and a digital technologist, but it's much more than that. It is an ecosystem thinker. I can't think outside 4-dimensional or 5-dimensional in multiple ways. So I guess the best way to describe what I do is people give me a challenge. In fact, one of my favourite sayings is, don't be afraid of big challenges. Just go out there and meet them. And so I'm often given a difficult question. Like, one of the challenges that I've been working on at the moment is how do we create a process by which it started out that we could shift the 3% of women who get venture capital. And that was the original problem I was given. Like, we've got a huge bias against, women-led businesses getting venture capital. What I realised is that's actually not the problem. That's the outcome of the problem. The problem is that we need to create processes where we remove biases out of our business decisions. And so from that, I've developed a patented technology. So what I do is I analyse problems, create the technology ecosystems that can resolve that or enable that. But most importantly, I bring the people together and the best people together to do the best job that's required in a collaborative and connected way. And that requires behavioural economics. It requires looking at what sort of technologies are required. People will often say, here's a problem, what technology is there? And I say, no, we need to analyse the problem, and then we need to align technology to that. It's the enabler. If you say, here's a piece of technology, it'll solve your problem. No, you're just using technology. You're not actually solving your problem. So in terms of what I do, I work in the digital technology space. I look at challenges. I use education and people, and I use the technology as the enabler to resolve the challenges that we do. And, of course, we know in the digital space it is pervasive. So creating a place where we're digitally trusted as opposed to secure, and I think there is a difference, is certainly the thing that's on my radar, very much so. And education is definitely part of that. So, knowledge sharing and all of those sorts of things is critically important in that. And creating ventures that are robust and resilient, commercial ventures. I do believe that everybody should get paid fairly, and that businesses can deliver ESG metrics, they can deliver impact, they can deliver all the right things if we put infrastructures in the right way. When we're talking about, and again, the digital space and, cybersecurity as we call it, it's a view where currently I've used this analogy a few times in the last couple of weeks, it's a little bit like a chocolate, and, we have hard crust on the outside of the chocolate and we have a soft centre. And a lot of our processes around keeping ourselves safe in this digital world that we're in, which is pervasive, it's absolutely everywhere around us. It doesn't stop and start at any one point. There's no beginning and the end. It's a continuum. Is that you can keep putting layers around you to protect you, your systems and your networks, and you can keep putting those around you, but they can still crack, and the soft, gooey part will get out. It will escape. But if you look inwardly and you look at how can I create a strong, trusted, resilient core, and we look at things from a very different perspective. So if we look at one of the drivers of the digital space, and we all talk about it, it's data and records and information and, our intellectual property and all of those sorts of things, the way we conduct business, etc. we need to be able to look at that and how we can value that more than what we spend on that security to try and stop people getting in. So it's a shift in a conversation from security, which I think is actually handing the task to someone else, to coming back and looking at it and saying, well, how do I change the way I conduct my business? How do I change the way that I deliver and value what I do in my business, make it strong, make it resilient, make it robust, make it agile, make it able to pivot when we have things like, pandemics and so forth. But rather than just stopping people getting in, make it strong at the core. And so it's a different way of thinking. And that's, I think in terms of where we sit currently now in this digital space, I don't think we're actually looking that way. I think we just keep adding layers to the outside, and that's having profound impacts on, for example, small businesses adopting, safe digital practices, because they see the terminology cybersecurity is, well, I pay somebody else to do that. Security is a task that somebody else does, not a behavioural thing that I might need to change. And that might mean, doing processes in a different way. And that can be quite challenging. So there's a lot of change management in advancing digital technologies that I don't think we're addressing. We just go, here's technology, use it, rather than maybe we need to actually have a cultural maturity in the way we think about things before we actually start to put technology in. I'm an advocate, obviously, for technology, but I'm also an advocate for making it fit for purpose and to address, real-world challenges. A couple of really big pieces of research coming up, and doing these with a number of universities and a couple of great colleagues, Dr. Karen Renaud and Dr. Danny Dresner, who is the founder of IASME, who's actually at Manchester University. And we both have, all three of us have very similar thinking in around creating an environment of digital trust as opposed to cybersecurity. But the particular area of research that we're looking at and building towards is that we are very cognizant of the fact that there is 99% of the economy is made up of small to medium enterprises. And of course, there's a misconception about what that looks like. And it doesn't seem to be, we aren't shifting their responsibilities and their accountabilities and their appetite for having safe digital practices. It doesn't seem to matter how much information we give them and how many certificates we give them and how many, cyber essential certificates and how many, processes that we give them. There is a reason why they're not adopting it, and we actually do think it's coming back to an emotional response. So the research that we're looking at now is what are the emotional responses that we're experiencing from the digital environment in which we're working in, and how are those emotional responses impacting our decisions on the way that we conduct our businesses, the safe practices that we do. Are we sticking our heads in the sand, being the ostrich? And are we fearing that if we are given information that we have to act a certain way? We don't know the answers to that question, by the way. We just know that initial research is indicating that if the SME market, which is 99% of the global economy, are responding and reacting differently to the corporate world. So the corporate world are certainly putting money into CISOs and lots of infrastructure and networks and systems and education and so forth. We do know that small businesses, we made assumptions that we think it's just a lack of resources, but we actually know that's not the case. Initial research is telling us that that's not the case. So the next lot of research we're doing is to look at what are those emotional responses, what's driving those emotional responses and behaviours in small to medium enterprises, and how will that impact the way that we prepare policy, process, strategy moving forward to best support those businesses, because we do know that a very large percentage of those small to medium businesses are being impacted by malicious cyber activity. But most of that is actually person-centred. It's being driven by people, not by technology. So that would tell us that we have to look at the human side of things rather than the technology side of things. So that's one of the big areas of technology and cyber that I'm doing. And the other area is to use blockchain technologies to measure and authenticate measures that will impact things like ESG metrics, so that we can improve business processes. So there's sort of two big areas of research that I'm working on. One, they both are actually connected in terms of measurements and so forth. But they're the two big areas at the moment. There's always an array of new ventures, but one I am particularly excited about is a new, hasn't actually got a new title yet, or it's a new entity, but it's an accelerator, incubator, community outreach entity, if you like, that is going to be intentionally women-led ventures, and it will be focused 100% around cyber tech, green tech, clean tech, agri-tech and emergent tech, so all the state-of-the-art techs, and certainly it is women in tech. But one of the things that we do know is that we currently have somewhere between 8 to 14% of positions in tech globally are filled by women. That is unacceptable. And generally of those positions, we don't have women in leadership in tech. And if they do, they have a very difficult time in terms of the bias that they still experience. So we are going to be running an intentional incubator. It will be based out of Wales, and one of the reasons for that is that Wales is doing some amazing stuff in terms of cyber and emergent tech. It will be multi-jurisdictional. In other words, we will be engaging Europe and other countries around the world. We will be looking at it to be a fast-track mechanism for global talent to get into the UK that is intentionally women only, because at the moment they are also biased in that regard. And we also want to make sure that the ventures that are created in response to ideation from business. So in other words, and particularly small business. So our community outreach is about going out to the businesses, particularly the small to medium enterprises, outside the cities, into the regional areas to say, what are the challenges they're having? Then look for women entrepreneurs, and then have a community outreach program with the universities and the colleges and the businesses to fill, co-directors and co-founders and developing roles and so forth. So the ventures themselves will be women-led. It will be a diverse group of people. It's not just going to be women only in the ventures, but it's about definitely making sure that we intentionally shift the dial that is not moving. We're stuck on 8 to 14% in the industry, but we're also stuck on less than 3% of getting venture capital. So we need to make sure that the venture capital that we bring in is focused 100% on intentional women-led enterprises, which we know have amazing outcomes. And so I'm really excited about that. There's some amazing people involved in that conversation at a very high level. Marley Baum from W Lounge in Germany, highly respected in the women-led venture space, will be joining me on that, plus a whole range of government officials and so forth in that. So that's really exciting. And, of course, the other one is my work with P&L Digital and Faces Collective, which is about that, top of the pyramid. It's really high-level strategic change in global challenges in terms of deploying technologies and developing out the patent technologies that I've developed over the last couple of years. So there's some really exciting things. Faces Collective is certainly around recognising that if we are to make substantial change using technologies that involve data, GDPR, cyber protection, making sure that we have resilient businesses that use blockchain technologies, AI, IoT, we need to make high-level strategic change as well as that to support those industries and businesses. So it's sort of, high level and then also dealing with a specific challenge around gender. One of the other roles that I've got is as a delegate for UN Women UK on the 65th Commission for the Status of Women at the UN. And it was noted this year that unless we make significant change about bringing women into tech and into the digital sector, we will redesign systems that have built inherent bias over the last 2,000 years. We are at a pivotal moment where when we're building digital technologies, we must have diverse minds and diverse processes building systems for the future. And at the moment, we don't. So we have to change it, and we have to be very intentional about that, which is, it's an exciting point to be at in that space. I actually was asked to write a piece about, state-of-the-art AI, very deep neural learning programs, AI, where they literally go out and scrape, massive amounts of data. But the conversation that's not being had is about the fact is, if you're scraping all of that data, and you're actually scraping biased data, but you're also scraping misinformation and false information, so garbage in, garbage out. So nobody's actually having, or I shouldn't say nobody, there are people that are having conversations, but there's not enough being spoken about behind every piece of technology, whether it's state-of-the-art AI, whether it's blockchain, whether it's IoT, it doesn't matter. Behind every piece of technology, there's us, humans. Computers and technology don't build themselves. We do. And so we have the decisions and the ability to change that. And if we continue to have the same biases that have created the systems of discrimination and gender, the lack of gender equity and all of those things, because we haven't had inclusion in its build, then we only have ourselves to blame. AI, machine learning, is only learning that we tell the machines to learn. So we need to make sure that the data that goes in, you are correct. If it needs to, women think a different way. People of diverse backgrounds think differently. So that has to be inbuilt in our design process, and we aren't. And we've had 2,000 years of 50% of the world's population not being included. And that has to change. In fact, it's 50.7% of the population are women. And at the moment, we don't have gender equity. The Secretary General of the United Nations says until we address SDG 5, we will never achieve the SDGs, because you're excluding 50.7% of the population. You're only building it for 50% of the population. And that's quite a profound statement to think about. We all think about climate change and we think about that being critical, but we won't achieve changes in climate change when you're only addressing 50% of the population. And women profoundly will impact changes in terms of improvements for climate change. So, it's our design process now is manifestly important for us to work and to shift that dial. And we have to be intentional about that. Yeah, look, most people, when they look at my CV, I have, multiple roles, but one that's been there for a particular, long period of time is my original consulting firm, which is called Areté Business Performance. Now, most people think Areté is actually a French word. It's not. It's actually a Greek word. And Areté is a word that means excellence of all kinds. It's inherent in the way we think, our values, our morality, our design, everything. It's how we think. It's excellence in all kinds. And so that's been really important to me in my business career. It also led me to one of my very proud moments was working at the Nobel Peace Laureate Summit with Nobel Peace winners, and over a year-long project looking at their particular inherent challenges that they were having in meeting their goals and visions, and how we could use digital technologies to improve that, and working with 7 Nobel Peace Laureates and coming out with a digital solution at the end of that at the World Summit of Nobel Peace Laureates in 2019. And so those areas of excellence have been embedded right through my career. So although, I very rarely use that consulting entity, I've kept that name because it keeps me grounded in my decision-making process. When I'm looking at, as I said before, the pieces of the puzzle, I look at excellence. I look at the way things are connected. I look at respecting people, valuing people, integrity. And that's important when we design digital technology as well, because digital technology and technology is designed to enable people. It's not designed to enable technology. And so Areté Business Performance really grounds the way that I think. And I don't make decisions based on how much money I'm going to make. What I know is that if you do things the right way with the right impact, and it impacts businesses, people, governments, systems, you will generate revenue, but it will be impactful revenue and you'll have integrity in that. So I think that's really, really important. And I guess in many ways, when I'm asked, for example, advice for somebody going into the industry, what I generally say is, and I've used this term before, go and find your tribe. Now, that might sound a funny thing to say, but at my age, it's taken me a long time to find the right people that I want to work with, because you have to be able to find the people. We don't all have to think alike, but we all have to have the same set of values, that if we get to a challenge or we get to a fork in the road, and generally in business it's going to be money or power or both, what are the decisions you're going to make? Are you going to forgo your integrity and your values and overstep that line to make a decision? Or are you going to stick to your integrity and values and find a way through that? And so when I say to people, wanting to get into the industry of digital technology or to cyber or the digital trust space, it's go out and network, and then network some more, and you'll make lots of mistakes. You'll probably be emotionally burnt a few times as well, because you'll go down a certain pathway and realise those people aren't the right ones to be engaged in. But set your path and know that that's your path, and then find the right people. And networking is the best way to do that, and to be engaged in networking groups that understand the pathway where you want to go. And so it's very difficult, to say to people, there's a certain thing that you have to do. But, networking is really, really important. It's understanding the people side of things, because we can build technology to do anything we want it to do, but we can't change the people that we engage in when we do that. And so finding your right tribe and finding the right people is critically important. And that's really learning networking skills and learning about people and finding those right people, and a very broad base of people. Not all the people that think the same as you do. In fact, you want people that challenge you in your thinking in that space. So I think that's really important. And for me, that is connected to that concept of Areté. And it still governs most things that I do. And it's held me in very good stead through, different things. Had lots of failures. It's not an entrepreneur on this planet that hasn't had failures. And if they say they haven't, I don't think they're probably telling the truth. But your success is tied up in your integrity and your values and how you stick to those. And I think that's really important. As a woman in tech, we have individual challenges. So again, it's finding a very diverse group of people and some really strong mentors. My go-to mentor are male, because I don't want to have groupthink, because I work in the gender space. So, I've got a really, great friend. There's my go-to person, and I've had this gut feeling I need a sense test, and I go to them. So I always try to challenge my own thinking. So I think as a woman in tech and a woman in cyber, again, get a balance of people to mentor you and support you through that process, because there'll be some challenging moments in that sector, and you'll need support. And so that's probably the best advice I can give. So with ransomware, we're looking at a huge problem. But instead of going, okay, well, how do we stop all of these people trying to take what we've got? My thinking is, what if we don't have something to ransom? Now, that doesn't mean we don't have things that are valuable, but we need to look at it very differently. And so, not being afraid to challenge that does bring profound innovation. And that's sort of at the moment that we're at now. I'm on the management committee for USEC, which is a forum that runs out of Europe every year for human-centred security technology. And each year we put a call out for papers. And what was really interesting, there was one particular paper that came in, and the concept was around ransomware and how governments respond to the challenges that are created from ransomware. And the question I wrote back to the people who submitted the paper was, you've missed the obvious. The obvious is there's a layer before government. So in other words, there's a layer of accountability. So if an entity is attacked and they pay up and they've got a systemic weakness that has allowed a ransomware attack to get into a business, there is still a lack of accountability of the business that's allowed that to happen, and the expectation that government's going to solve it for them. What I'm saying is there needs to be a collaborative approach, but ultimately there needs to be a sense of accountability back at the business level, and to go, I had that weakness. What was that weakness? Moving forward, how do I prevent that? Rather than going, I've had this weakness, I'm going to try and cover it up, I'm going to get government to deal with it for me, it's the world's problem. Well, actually, let's just back it up a bit and look at the systemic processes. And a lot of it comes back to people. And, of course, people don't like accepting accountability. I'm not saying it's easy, because I'm thinking, I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that, paying a ransomware, if you're a business and you know that somebody's got your data and what have you, and you need to get it back or you need to function, it's a bit like somebody being, kidnapped. You'll pay a ransomware because you think you're going to get it back. But what we know is that, we've got a very small percentage of people actually, or businesses actually, get the thing that's been ransomed back. So therefore, that would tell you we've got a fundamental failure if we keep paying the money. And more importantly, where in terms of our thinking, we spend more paying ransomware, the amount that they ask, the demands, the ransomware demands, we pay more for that than what we spend on being secure and safe. Now, that will tell you we need a shift in that. If we're prepared to pay $1 trillion, which is it's heading that way in 2022, $1 trillion for ransomware attacks, and yet our spend on cybersecurity is around about $154 billion. That means we're prepared to spend more for what we are accepting to lose than invest in being safe. That's a profound problem. We need to flick that around. Yeah, it's always a question I'm asked. I mean, I should say, obviously, follow influencers, follow me, and follow those sort of things. And I've got written a recent book, obviously, called Blockchain Impact, and in that I've written a lot about that. But I would actually say, and this is interesting coming from me, at the beginning of 2020, I wasn't a great Twitter user. In fact, I almost recoiled at the thought of it. And I really enjoy it now because it's quick fire thinking. And again, it's about following and listening to good quality podcasts, a broad base of information, but being able to analyse that. So follow those who are influencers, experts in the space. I don't mean follow those who are the most popular necessarily. The likes of myself, Dean Armstrong, Philip Ingram, there's a whole range of people. Follow us and follow the people that we follow. There's lots of podcasts, there's lots of books, out there. There's a difference between education and information. So if you want information, you can go out there and you can get a broad base of information, but you'll have to analyse it. You'll have to analyse how much of it's true and how much of it isn't. And for that, you need to make sure that you look at the credentials of the people that you're listening to and information that you're listening to. I've got a famous saying that I will never say anything that I can't back up with fact. So people often will say, oh, that's not true. Actually, let me just regurgitate that. So if you can ask somebody a question and they can't answer it, then I think you've got a challenge. But if you want education means that you have to have an assessment on what you have learned. In other words, you've got to have a change in knowledge, capacity, attitude, whatever. It's got to be a change in something. So there is a difference between information and education. It depends what your goal is. But again, I'm always loath to say certain books that are out there because I think they get outdated very quickly. I mean, obviously I've written a number, but I think follow those people. Follow the world authorities and the leaders that are the innovators, the real cutting edge innovators, and listen to what they've got to say. Most importantly, it ignites interest and curiosity in yourself because no one person has all the answers. I know it's a long-winded answer to the question, is there any resources that are out there? But in fact, I know that one of the people on Twitter this week asked a similar question, and I think we probably all put about 100 different podcasts and things that we watch. So Philip Ingram does a great one called Chatting with Ingram. Dean Armstrong does some amazing ones with 36 Group, and I've helped him with those. And I know Jenny from the People Hacker does some great things as well. And again, they're often, I think the thing that I like about them is that they're people related, not technology related. And so I think that's important. Join legitimate associations and things, like the security institutes and, the UK cybersecurity associations and those sorts of special interest groups, and get involved. I've recently become a fellow of the Royal Society of the Arts. They do some amazing things. So look for the credible organisations, not the most popular ones, because the most popular ones are generally there to revenue generate, not necessarily give the best information, and certainly not education.